Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight for Sanderson's SMI education series. Great topic tonight, fire safety, always an important one. We're just going to wait a couple of minutes while everyone gets into the seminar here, and then we'll get started on this topic. We will have a poll for everyone as well, so please be sure to vote in our poll so we can know how to best deliver all of the information that we deliver to you. Once again, I'm Casey with Sanderson Management. This is Caitlin. We'll be your tech moderators. Well, I'm actually just here to do a quick intro. Caitlin's really your tech moderator for tonight. And then Christina Brown will take over and introduce your lovely panel for this evening. We still have a few people coming in, so we're going to wait a couple more seconds here, and then we definitely will get started. Okay, I'm sorry if this is repetitive to those of you who joined very, very much at the start. Welcome to our session tonight. This is our session on fire safety, a very important topic for all of us. I'm Casey from Sanderson. This is Caitlin. As I noted, Caitlin will be your tech moderator for tonight, and I get most of the night off, which is pretty exciting. I will hand it over to Christina Brown of Sanderson Management very shortly to introduce our lovely panel for this evening, and we'll get started. Looks like we're starting to slow down with attendees, so we'll give it probably another minute, and then we will definitely get started. As I noted, we will be doing a poll this evening on how we would like to deliver these education seminars to you. Please be sure to give us your input, as we're always looking to support our boards and our owners and our teams in the best possible ways. Okay, looks like our attendance has slowed down, so we're going to get started. We have lots of information to provide to you tonight. I will now introduce you to Christina Brown of Sanderson Management, one of our senior property managers, pardon me, also one of our supervising property managers, and she'll take over. Enjoy the night, everyone.
Thank you, Casey and Caitlin. Welcome, everyone. We have a information-packed evening tonight. We've got some great panelists here. I'm going to introduce them to you. I don't know where on your screen. On my top left, I'm going to just go in order, is Mark Fera. He is from Vital Safety Service. He has been in the fire prevention for approximately 35 years. He started out as a licensed electrician and a licensed fire alarm technician. And when he got tired of the lack of accountability in the industry, he had an opportunity to start Vital Safety Services. Prior to that, a big part of his life was also involved in sports, in particular hockey and baseball. You can see all of his hockey stuff in behind him. He was a scout in the National Hockey League, the Ontario Hockey League, and he's put together the world's largest collection of Toronto Maple Leaf game used and rare vintage memorabilia that he would like to use to help raise awareness for sexually abused children. He looks forward to meeting everyone tonight and helping out. In the bottom, we have Tony Sabatini, waving there. Sorry. Tony is the chief of fire prevention with the Guelph Fire Department. His work is focused on leading a bureau of 6 fire prevention officers in their roles as fire inspectors, fire investigators, and as a public fire and life safety educator. He has spent the last 34 years devoted to the fire service, first as a dispatcher, then a firefighter, and finally as a fire prevention officer to his position currently within the Guelph Fire Prevention Bureau. His work primarily involves fire safety inspections, enforcement, fire investigation, and educating the public of fire safety. Last but certainly not least, Matt Valeriote. He's Assistant Chief of the Fire Prevention Bureau of the Guelph Fire Department. He first trained as a paramedic and then began his career at Guelph Fire as a firefighter in 1992. In 2005, he moved into the Fire Prevention Bureau as a fire prevention officer, and in 2015 was promoted to Assistant Chief of Fire Prevention. In his current role, he supervises and mentors 5 fire prevention officers. He's responsible for training, mentoring, and overseeing these officers. And he also still will conduct fire safety inspections, public education with respect to fire safety and prevention, as well as fire investigations to determine the origin and cause of fires. So those of you who have joined us before, you know that we like to do something fun to get you to think. So we asked the three speakers, if you were stranded in a building with only 3 fire safety tools, which would you choose and why? So we have smoke alarm, escape ladder, extinguisher. We have portable fire extinguisher, smoke and CO alarms installed, and a cell phone. And we have a fire extinguisher, a fire safety plan, and one of the most important tools for this one person is education on fire and life safety. So we're going to pass it over to Matt and Tony to get started this evening.
Hi, everybody. Again, I'm Matt. I'm the Assistant Chief here at the Guelph Fire Department, Fire Prevention Bureau. I just want to thank everybody for taking a valued part of your time tonight to come to this session. I've been with the fire department for 32 years now. And, you know, I've responded to some pretty tragic situations. You know, last year in Guelph was our worst year on record for fatal fires. We had 6 people die in fires in Guelph last year, and a 7th related to a fire that had occurred. So yeah, I feel pretty strongly about fire prevention, fire safety, and education. So I just want to say thanks to everybody for coming. Tony here is my immediate supervisor, and we work really well together here in Guelph.
I can't add much more to that. I totally in agreement with everything that he said.
How did you want to start? Did you want to start with some questions?
Oh, you're muted. You're muted.
Sorry, we can certainly do that.
Sure.
One thing I do want to add, and I'm sure that all of the gentlemen who are on tonight will also say, their information is going to be specific to Guelph or their company. So if you have any questions, they'll reiterate this, I'm sure, specific to your home, your townhouse, or your high rise, please reach out to your specific fire department in the city. So one of the questions we had was, how often must a high-rise condo do fire drills? What about residents that are not able to leave their units easily?
Yeah, so a high-rise condo, we're talking about a condo, a building with a height of at least 18 meters from grade to the floor of the top story, is required to do fire drills on a quarterly basis. So every 3 months, as per the approved fire safety plan and the Ontario Fire Code, they will have to conduct a fire drill in their building. As far as residents that are not able to leave their units easily, keep in mind that when you're conducting a fire drill, the Ontario Fire Code only requires the supervisory staff to participate in that drill. So supervisory staff or staff who have a delegated responsibility for fire safety in the building, they are named in the fire safety plan, and they are the only ones required to participate. Having said that, we always like to see the more the merrier, right? Practice makes perfect. I can't tell you enough how important it is to know what to do when fire strikes. Last month in Guelph, we had a fire in a 6-story multi-unit apartment building. And when our crews got there, we had an individual who was on a balcony. There was smoke pouring out of her balcony window and door. She was trapped on the balcony. And when our crews went into the building, the first, actually floors 2 to 5, the corridors and stairwells were full of smoke. So practice makes perfect. We have people trying to leave that building in a panic when maybe they should have sheltered in place. So we always like to see occupants participating. They don't have to participate, but for those who can't safely escape or have mobility issues and can't leave their units, there are some recommendations that are put out by the Ontario Fire Marshal's Office for those specific situations. You have two options when the fire alarm sounds. We believe the best option is to evacuate immediately because the safest place is always outside. Conditions can change quickly, doors can be left open, smoke can spread very quickly. So we always say, when you hear that alarm, if you're physically able, evacuate the building immediately. The longer you take to evacuate, the more chance you have of having a situation that we had last month in Guelph when smoke spread through this building. These apartment buildings are designed with very good fire safety features. They have rated fire separations, the walls and the ceilings, they're rated for a specific amount of time. They can withstand direct flame contact for 30 minutes, 45 minutes, 1 hour, potentially 2 hours. So if you can't physically evacuate in a timely manner, the fire is not in your unit, you may shelter in place. When you're sheltering in place, you want to seal any cracks around your doors to keep smoke from coming in, and call 911 if you feel your life is in danger.
And if I could just kind of reiterate and jump in on that, we saw a scenario in Oakville with a great lady that's been working at this particular building for a long period of time. And she saw the fire alarm go off, walked over to the fire panel, said 4th floor. So she made it, she helped herself to walk up to the 4th floor to see what was going on. And when she got to the 4th floor, she heard the alarms going off, didn't see anything smoke-wise, but noticed everybody in the building required assistance. So she could hear a smoke alarm, open the door, and there was a lady actually smoking a cigarette in a wheelchair, confined to a wheelchair. The ash had fallen into her lap, fallen into a box of stick matches. She was completely engulfed in flames. We lost her at the time of the accident. They went back out. She went to go get an extinguisher. The staff was doing their extinguishers at the time. It was discharged, so it created a real mess. And when the Ontario Fire Marshal's office showed up, the first question they said to her was, why did you go to the 4th floor? And she said, I don't know, the fire alarm had said that. And they said, well, what does it say in your fire safety plan? She said, I've never read it. She said that they reiterated to her that that is the legal agreement between you and that city, the local fire department. Okay, you must follow that. And as both Tony and Matt, and before I say anything further, guys, thank you so much for your service for us and keeping people safe. And I don't think people ever will appreciate the work you guys put in. So thank you. But I just think that, it's so important to understand that fire safety plan needs to be updated, that person's requiring assistance needs to be updated as required, and your fire drills have to be conducted. And it's not your owners that need to worry about it. It's not even necessarily your managers that are going to conduct it. It's your managers who need to make sure the people that are going to be in place are going to conduct the emergency procedures as stated in that legal document, which is your fire safety plan. So I just wanted to kind of jump in and add a little bit there, and hopefully I can contribute as we go along the way here.
Yeah, and certainly.
Sorry,
go ahead, Tony.
May I? I'm just going to tie it in. There's been a lot of information there, and thanks, Mark. You're absolutely correct about the fire safety plan. I'm glad you brought that up. I just want folks to remember, okay? The alarm goes off. In Ontario, the Ontario Fire Marshal's Office says to get out if you can. It doesn't say to shelter in place. The only time you don't leave is if you can't leave, whether it be to a physical limitation or whether or not there's smoke there. That's when you shelter in place. To which, don't waste time, give the call into 911 to let us know you're there, okay? The City of Toronto has a different take on it, and I know that the Ontario Fire Marshal's Office bristles at this, but there has to be some kind of an understanding. The City of Toronto has very high buildings. So in a lot of cases, they'll just say, stay in place and not leave because their studies have shown that maybe they're safer to stay. Having said that, though, our most recent fire that happened in Toronto, which just happened a few weeks ago, ended up having people staying in place, okay? And about 14 of them required hospitalization, whereas had they probably left, we wouldn't have had that many needing to be hospitalized for smoke inhalation. I'm not knocking the City of Toronto for doing what they're doing, But we take our cues from the Fire Marshal's Office of Ontario. Right now, their position still stands. If you hear the alarm, exit and leave right away. 2, fire safety plan. Every occupant, the document is thick, but every occupant needs to know 2 components of that fire safety plan. One is the actual procedures of getting out. They're very simplistic. They're also posted on every floor level if you live in a place that has more than one story, okay? And the other is responsibilities to make sure that you remove fire hazards. If you actually know those 2 components of the document itself, just that alone, as condominium dwellers, you are 90% ahead of the game in terms of fire safety. Just those 2 components of that thick document. Okay, that's. I just wanted to put that in a paraphrased version of what these fine 2 gentlemen have spoken about.
Yeah, and when you go back to Toronto, and I know you guys don't focus a lot on the downtown core, but remember your fire safety plan is stamped by the local fire department. So they're going to have that agreement with you, and they're going to have templates that specify that particular area. But again, poor lady, her name was Sadie, and she's a sweetheart of a lady. They looked officially at charging her for not following procedures. And I don't want to scare people by doing that, but you got to make sure you know what your building is. You got to make sure you know what your agreement is with the city. And one other thing about that fire in Toronto, and we saw some pictures of a fire in New York, is that one big thing that's a hot topic right now is your fire door separations. Okay, you're being told either to stay in your condo, put a wet towel in your thing in your unit, and close the door, make sure it's latching, place a wet towel at the base of the door, or in some areas they want you to leave if you know, depending on the situation wherever you're located. But if that door doesn't latch, we literally saw a fire in New York that took place in one unit. That door was not latched. That unit, the entire floor, the entire hallway was completely, it was completely burnt to a crisp. But when you walked across the hallway, that door had been latched and it didn't even look like there was smoke damage in there. So when you're doing your annual inspections, it's also very important, and you don't need your fire protection company to do this. You've got someone there to provide access. Okay, they're already opening doors and knocking on doors. Have them put a list together, open that door to the 3/4 point mark, let it close, and make sure it latches. Garbage chutes, hallway doors. Everything needs to make sure it's latched because they're all considered fire, fire separations. Okay, so we want to make sure we're doing that. And I'm just trying to keep us all on track here, right? Little bits at a time.
Thanks, Mark. So one thing that both Matt and I had a conversation on is during the day, when we have a fire alarm goes off, and you have staff there, you have your superintendent or what have you, things go pretty smoothly. So one of the best practices was actually having different people within the building that are occupants also trained on that fire. So that's just a little pass on.
Christina,
Fire.
everybody has that person in their unit that's in your office every day, right? Put a fire warden system together. 90% of your energy is going to go on 10% of the people in your building. Get them involved. Turn their energy into something that's going to work for you.
Yeah. So for a townhouse condo site, what's important to have in a fire safety plan, and is one even required? Tony, Matt?
Yeah, so the Ontario Fire Code requires a fire safety plan in a residential occupancy when the occupant load in a building exceeds 10 persons. So we would have to look at, are there more than 10 persons in a building? If there are, a fire safety plan would be required. If there are not, a fire safety plan is not required. Anytime a fire safety plan is required, there's very specific measures that are outlined in the fire code that have to be present in that plan. And many of those measures would apply to the majority of buildings.
Okay, so tying that in, we have a lot of questions about occupancy. How many people can live inside of a unit, etc. So, you know, there's people that modify basements, and, you know, is that okay to have separate basements, bedrooms in basements? You know, does that change what the requirements are as far as fire safety plan?
Okay, specifically to that, if you have a bedroom and a basement, the Ontario Fire Code doesn't identify just a bedroom and a basement unless you're dealing with a retrofit provision, which is something else where you have an entire apartment down. However, you may have property standards divisions within your cities, and they're the ones who make that determination of whether it's even firstly allowed, and secondly, where they might have the need to have a window in terms of not just for lighting, but also for escape. So how the fire code reads, generally, we can't do an enforcement capability on someone who puts a bedroom in a basement unless we are called to something and there's an imminent hazard with the manner in which a bedroom is placed down there. So that's basically what it would be in a nutshell for someone who's asking a question like that.
Perfect. So then just going back in regards to townhouses, what's the definition of a building? Is it a block of a townhouse? Is it a low rise, high rise?
Good question. Very good question. So if we're looking at a building, how a building is generally identified, it's wall to roof. So let's look at something, for example. If you take a look at a high-rise condo building, the whole thing is one building, okay? So that whole thing, although it contains all the units within it, individual dwelling units, that whole structure is a building. Now, there are other ones where you have condo complexes and they're more on the ground like houses, but they got about 7 or 8 tied into one. That entire 7 or 8 touched in one is a building. The only difference being is if there's a firewall that's been actually constructed. A firewall is a material that's built in such a fashion that if there were a fire, it will not cause the other part out on the other side of the firewall to collapse. Then it's considered whatever is attached to that firewall, that would be one building, and whatever is attached on the other side of the firewall is considered a building. So that's how it is in the most simplistic way, what a building would be. It's the entirety of the walls and the roof. That's the building. That's how the fire code would look at that.
And one of the thing, guys, when you're looking at these townhouses and the points that are being stressed, we've seen a couple scenarios. He mentions the roofs and everything. So when you're looking at townhouses, there's obviously walls separating the 2 units, but in the attic, we've seen a lot of wide open space going right across, which will not prevent fire from spreading. So we have seen fires in Brampton area in particular, in some of the older units where those units aren't going right to the ceiling and there is open space for smoke to travel through. So it's really important that you know your occupancy and how they're constructed.
And typically with what Mark was saying there, you will, when you do see, when a building does have a firewall, they'll have something called a parapet. It extends past the roof line. And when you see that little wall that extends up past the roof line, that typically means there's a firewall in place and it would stop that spread. So.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, we have a question about firewall here. Just a question about hallways in buildings. So if there are fire doors in the main lobby hallway, should they be closed at all times? They like to keep them open for moving supplies, going to the pool, etc.
Can they be a little more specific? Did you say lobby?
Main lobby hallway. Yeah.
Main lobby hallway. The doors are located like, are you talking about the controlled access doors kind of?
Nope, the next set of doors. So you go through the controlled access, I'm assuming. And then there's usually doors that lead to different hallways, etc. That's typically the fire door. And they like to keep it open. Is that permitted? And then we can get into Mark with options. So
yeah, typically, well, the way the fire code reads, a door and a fire separation shall be kept closed when not in use. Those doors will be considered doors in a fire separation, separating one fire compartment from another fire compartment. And when they're not in use, they do have to be kept closed.
Yeah. And so we see those in garages coming in, those heavy garage door garages, going into stairwells, etc. And so Mark, I know in some buildings you've different companies have installed a mag lock on that door. So do you want to touch on that?
Yeah, so as was just pointed out to everybody, a fire door is a fire door. It's meant to prevent fire from smoking, from traveling from one side of the building to the next. You are allowed by permit, okay? You have to make sure we obtain permits and drawings and everything, and let's not forget that, because without that, you would be legally liable should something happen. You can have a door opener, a door holder, which is basically like a mag lock, and that would hold that door open in place with a little magnetic device that's tied into the relay in your fire panel. And as soon as that alarm goes off, then that would close the door and latch and act in place as a fire separation. So you can do that in those type of occupancies, but for stairwell doors and everything else, they must remain closed. You can't just prop something open to get fresh air, because again, as we just spoke about a minute ago, those are life safety devices. They're designed to handle smoke and fire and protect you.
Yeah, so none of those little feet that hold those doors
Absolutely
open
not.
is the method.
And it can't be
One question.
door holder either. The door holders on the back, you can't be adjusting them. They have to be left so that door closes and latches at all times.
So one question we got a lot about was what's required to be tested annually versus daily versus weekly, monthly, etc. Is that list different from townhouses to high rises?
There is one massive list of required checks, tests, and inspections. The fire code, it would depend on the building. It would depend on the fire safety features present in the building. There's all kinds of variables, but the list, as Mark fully understands this, the list can be massive depending on the occupancy and the fire safety features present.
Yeah, there's a massive list out there, and again, it's a responsibility to determine what you have in your building that applies to those checklists. Everything from emergency lighting, pilot lights have to be checked daily, door closures have to be checked daily, and then you get into monthlies, which are if your system has a fire panel in there, extinguishers, hoses, emergency lighting, those must be checked on a monthly basis. And then of course you have your annual inspection that is every device tied into your safety system, your sprinkler, fire, extinguishers, hoses, emergency lighting. You have your quarterly inspections, which involve elevators dropping, pressurization fans turning on, circulation fans turning off, and the list goes on and on and on. It really kind of is independent to the building itself, and that's where we can have a chat later on, and as well as Tony and Matt to discuss what your specific building requires.
Okay. For for a unit, again, this is going to be, we're seeing this now with the increase of prices, townhouse or high rise, we're seeing a lot of not legal bedrooms where they're using dens or closets, etc. Is there any best practices that you guys can help with? Is there anything from a fire perspective that would prohibit that? Tony, yeah.
I mean, yeah, people putting bedrooms in areas they're not supposed to have bedrooms. The Ontario Building Code requires a permit for bedroom finishes. So best practices, get your permit, have your bedroom installed to code. That would be, my number one recommendation. Barring that, if there is a bedroom that is not code compliant, make sure there is a smoke and carbon monoxide alarm. Carbon monoxide alarm only if required. But a smoke alarm for sure located adjacent to that bedroom area. But I can only speak on what's legally required, and I would say install your bedrooms under permit, have them done properly.
From your understanding, can you have a bedroom in a room that does not have a egress window? And again, you would only be speaking for Guelph, so this may be different from city to city, but.
Go ahead, Tom. No,
there are other agencies involved in this. It's not just fire, right? So you have a property standards division as well within most municipalities, and they have certain bylaws respecting these extra bedrooms, whether they be in a basement or even the use of an area of an attic. It depends, right? So the fire code doesn't really identify the window component of a bedroom, and so if it doesn't identify it, then it becomes a little bit more difficult to enforce. Having said that, though, if we're to inspect and the situation is dire, and we believe strongly, and we can only believe based on evidence, we have to have reference materials, right? We wouldn't just go haphazardly and say, no, you can't have it. So what we would have is we would take a look at that, and if it's dire, we can issue an order to have a window actually installed if in fact it would be of a need for the escape. But that's usually a situation that that has to be very dire and imminently problematic for an individual or individuals. But here's the thing, it's not just the fire department, there are other agencies. Property standards is one of them, and I know that most municipalities have them, and there are certain bylaws with respect to that as well, okay?
Perfect, thank you. What about if an owner refuses to allow an outside fire safety company to come in to check devices within their unit?
Those ones get tough. I mean, let's say it's a fire alarm system device, or a sprinkler head. Mark will be able to speak to this. I'm sure he's encountered it much more than we have. From a fire code perspective, our only objective is to ensure the check, test, or inspection has been completed by the owner. The owner is a very broad definition in the fire code. It can mean the condo corp, it can mean the unit owner, it can mean the tenant. So our job is to ensure it gets done. How it gets done is up to the people who meet the definition of owner.
And
So
you're
with
right.
that, sorry, go ahead,
Go ahead.
Mark. I was going to jump. Okay, so with that, just remember, fire alarm systems, you'd have to have an actual tech that has been certified to the Ontario Fire Marshal's office. So division, but I won't get into the division C of the fire code specifies that individuals who have to do testing and inspecting of fire alarm and fire alarm system components has to be registered with the Ontario Fire Marshal's office. So that cannot be overlooked. So that you definitely need that. When you're looking at things such as let's look at extinguishers or look at emergency lighting. As an inspector, if we come there and they say, oh, I've done it, we will want to know what kind of equipment they've used. We want to know if they have an actual area that they actually test these properly in accordance to the standards that are referenced in the code. And if they can't show us that, then we can issue an order to say, no, you're going to need to do this in accordance to having those particular components there. Okay, and I'll let Mark, I think you can speak to this even further.
It's a huge challenge. I mean, our main focus is high rise and condominiums throughout Southern Ontario. And as the ones they're working out in Guelph, Kitchener, Waterloo, you're starting to notice a lot bigger buildings going up in those areas now. And you're going to find again that, as I've said before, 90% of your energy is going to go on 10% of your owners, and that's just never going to change. And they don't want to let you in. Remember, the general rule is that every device has to be tested in that, and the only reason it shouldn't be tested is if it's deemed to be a life safety issue for the technician testing it. And you're only allowed that 1 year to not test it, and it can only be 1 or 2 devices, and then you have to come up with a plan for next year. So we want to make sure, because you have to keep in mind, people on either side of that unit are paying common elements fees and their fees to make sure that their building is safe, and we need to make sure that one unit is not hoarding or anything like that. And just really quickly, it's also important who you're providing access to, who's providing access to your units. It's a great opportunity for property managers and people with authority to go in and actually look at these units, because we will note if we notice hoarding or anything like that, but there's no better time than that once a year when you enter the unit for yourself to go in and make sure you're not seeing anything that's kind of out of the blue here that you wouldn't expect. Okay, so yeah, you've got to try and get in them. I know it's a pain, but if you have a problem and they're flat out refusing it, that's when I would reach out to your fire inspector and say, what do I do in this situation? But we talked about this before we came in. If your fire inspector tells you it's okay, we'll let it go this year, or we'll look into it, make sure you get it in writing, because you're going to find yourself in a position where you've come in and you've said, well, the fire inspector told me, and you have a problem, and the Ontario Fire Marshal's knocking on your door. They're going to say, okay, where's the proof that was said to you? If you do not have it in writing, you follow the Ontario Fire guidelines, the inspection guidelines, and make sure you're doing it compliant. And it's going to be a bit of a pain, but you've got to do your best to stay on top of it.
Perfect. So a question. Oh, sorry, Caitlin.
We just have someone raising their hand, so I just don't know if they're tackling onto that. So I'm just gonna unmute. Hi, Tina. If you want to go ahead and
hurry up. I just wanted to add that I had this happen actually, and so I received a letter from the fire marshal, and their way to get somebody to do it is excellent, because what they did in the letter, they said, whomever refuses. So let's say the owner or the property manager wants to go in there, and whomever is in the unit refuses, it's that person who will get up to a $20,000 fine for refusing entry to check or replace fire detectors and whatever is needed. So that is the way to make them comply. That's a hefty fine.
Thank
I'm just
you.
gonna speak, I'm gonna speak quickly to that. The one thing to keep in mind, like, we have a condo unit that, let's just say it's owner occupied. And then we have the condo corporation. They both meet the definition of owner in the fire code. They're both responsible for fire code compliance. If that unit owner is failing to let somebody in to do the test, they meet the definition of owner in the fire code. The fire code says the owner is responsible for compliance with the fire code. And I know if that test didn't get done and we had to lay charges, our city prosecutor would have us charge both the unit owner and the condo corp there, bring them into court, let the courts figure it out. And there would be fines levied. So just keep that in mind too. They both meet the definition of owner for compliance.
Perfect. So just quickly then, townhouses, do they require an annual inspection of the devices underneath the ownership being partially condos, not?
Yeah, so let's say we're looking at a townhouse. Let's say we're looking at a 30 or 40-year-old townhouse, 2-story with a basement. Back then they required one battery operated smoke alarm on every story. In a rental unit, in rental units, those are required to be tested annually. And the landlord is responsible to ensure that's been completed. I can't speak on condo declarations. I can't speak on agreements between condo corps and unit owners. But in the Ontario Fire Code, in a unit, in an owner occupied townhouse, the fire code that's not being rented, there is no requirement to test those alarms annually.
Okay.
We
So
always
that's
leave
a
it
legal
up.
question and a legal question and a city by city.
Definitely reach out to your local fire department on that one,
Yeah.
because in Brampton, they've been really tough on people, and right, we've talked about some of the scenarios we're facing. Brampton's been no different. So, it's been a different challenge there.
All right, I've got a question for either Tony and Matt, and then a question following for Mark. So, how often should a list of owners who need assistance in an emergency be updated? And should that list be with the fire safety plan in the fire lockbox?
So if in fact you have people that require assistance for whatever issue that individual may have or those individuals may have, the update for your purposes should be done as soon as is practically possible. Okay, so that way it's updated in the fire safety plan, in the section where it talks about people who require assistance. At least then, when we've reviewed it and sent it back on another approval, it will be the most up-to-date version of the fire safety plan that you have, and it will be kept in a location that's been approved by us. In some cases, it'll be in a fire safety plan lockbox. Other cases, it may be somewhere else where we've approved it. So yeah, if you're updating it for people who require assistance, if you can do it as soon as is practically possible, have it submitted and we'll have it put in our files. But most importantly, it has to be in your files on scene for firefighters to know about it, okay?
Perfect. And then the fire safety plan itself, Mark, who decides, I guess, who prepares it? It would be your fire safety company. I know you guys have done a ton of them, but who decides where people should collect in the evacuation due to a fire in those plans?
And that's a great question. All these are great questions. And again, that's built on the template. On what the city's provided. I would go off the template. Actually, unit owners and management representatives can prepare their fire safety plan. You just want to keep in mind that it is a legal document, and if you haven't done it before, you're liable to go back and forth with the city a bunch of times in doing it. And some are now charging for each time you have to resubmit. So finding a company that does it regularly, it's up to the fire safety plan that was originally in there that would determine that. If you don't have a fire safety plan, then what we usually do is we work with the local fire department to go off their suggestions along with our experience to see where the best place is to meet. There is no specific math, question to that one. It's based on each type of occupancy and where they deem the safe places. But I can tell you right now, you make sure you have that, because if you don't and the fire department comes in and you have a bunch of people sitting in your hallway, not really sure what to do and all talking about what could be going on, they're not going to be happy about that, because they need that area to get through quickly and get to the emergency.
Okay. So back to your point, Matt, with regards to townhouses and what was required at one point versus what's required now. Should the condo corp just be responsible for installing carbon monoxide and CO, like smoke detector CO units in all those townhouses? Is that a best practice?
I'm gonna let Tony speak to this one, Christina.
Perfect.
Just for clarity, okay, let's look at the term owner. And the fire code is very, very clear. The fire code, that the owner is responsible for the provisions of the fire code, the entirety of that fire code. Okay. There's also ownership under the Fire Protection and Prevention Act. These two are combined. The Fire Protection and Prevention Act is the enabling legislation that allows the fire code to exist. So now, owner. In the Fire Protection and Prevention Act, the owner is the legal owner. In the Ontario Fire Code, an owner is anyone who has care and control of the space that they have. So what does that mean to who installs, who tests, who has to make sure they do the checks? Well, that's going to depend on who is owner. Is it the legal owner? Is it the owner who has care and control? It could even be the renter that's in there because they have care and control of that building. In our case, we are not in the position of deciphering who that owner is. So if we need it to be done and done in accordance to the timelines that the fire code has actually put forth, it has to be done. Now, if by chance it's not done and we're led to the area of enforcement, the charges will go, and we'd have to charge the legal owner and the other owner, whoever has care and control, and where it's rented, it'd be the landlord. So this is how our legal department has indicated to us, because of such a convoluted way in the way condo corps work. Not that it's a bad thing. I'm just saying the way we have to look at it, right? So what they're saying is the charges are going to be to many owners, and then it's going to be determined at the court to see who in actuality will be the person who's actually responsible. Does that, I know it sounds like a lot, but it's the best way that we can address it because of the way ownership is defined, not only in the fire code, but also in the Fire Protection and Prevention Act. So that's what would happen. So ownership is up to whoever has care and control. It can be the landlord if it's rental, and it has to be the legal owner too, whoever legally owns it. And so it's not to make it more muddy than it is. I'm hoping that kind of clarifies it a bit.
And really,
yeah, again, with townhouses, the corporation does own a good component of them, right? And so that has been a conversation Matt and I have had on this as well. So way cheaper than legal, and losing a life is just doing it.
Just getting it done.
Right.
Mark, you had something to add quickly?
Just keep in mind, guys, don't ever assume anything. Assume that your owner, that your board, and that your manager, and we just saw a manager actually charge $25,000, a single mom of two. She got her deficiency list. She gave it to the board held on it. And, essentially we know you guys as property managers aren't there to spend the board's money, but the fire department determined that manager knew there was deficiencies in there that were compromising the safety of the occupants. They should have either called Toronto Fire or they should have walked away from the building. So just remember, and we're not here to scare you, but just make sure you're keeping everything in writing. Okay, guys, make sure you're really protecting yourself.
Any best practices, I guess, for keeping smoke detectors, CO detectors, working, valid, current in townhouses or high rises? Often somebody hears a beep in the middle of the night, they'll pull it down, they don't report it to anybody. Is there any best practices any one of you have come across that would help with this?
Yeah, I can tell you right now, my best recommendation is get away from the plug-in units. Okay, go with a combination unit. You're replacing that unit once every 10 years. The other units that get plugged in are generally pulled out for vacuums, moved into a bedroom, and they need to be located in common areas. We talked a little bit about carbon monoxide, but remember, carbon monoxide has to be on the floor where there's a gas burning device, the floor above and a floor below. Remember, if you've got a garage underneath, that's producing carbon monoxide. The floor above has to have that as well. So try and eliminate those units and go with the dual combination units and get rid of them, because you're only going to replace one device, one labor, one test, and you've got that taken care of for 10 years.
Anything, Tony, Matt, that's worked well?
The only thing I want to mention there is, I agree with everything that Mark said, but just keep in mind also that when it comes to responsibilities in the fire code, when we're looking at a rental unit, the tenant actually has a responsibility to report to the landlord the minute they become aware that an alarm is either not functioning, been removed, anything like that. It's actually an offense if they don't report that. You know, we get called a lot here in Guelph, landlord-tenant disputes, students trying to get out of leases, and they call and say, you know, we haven't had a smoke alarm all year. You know, go after the landlord. Well, have you reported it? No, not yet. Well, you know what? It's an offense not to report. So just want to keep that in mind. If you are a tenant and you become made aware of it, report it immediately to the landlord, because they have a responsibility to deal with it immediately.
Okay. Who's responsible to keep all the fire equipment in working order in a condo corp? Is it the property manager? Is it the contractor? Is it the board?
It's the owner.
It's the owner.
Okay, so when we're looking at ownership, right, it's going to depend on, you got the legal owner, and now you have the one who has care and control. Who has care and control of that?
The board.
Now, right. So the board, then, if they have care and control, then the board carries on that responsibility. The board may have that responsibility with a person like Mark, and then he would do it based on whenever you've established that for that to be. So again, ownership is very key. Let's understand just who the defined definition is. In this case, it would be the condo board, as you've just mentioned, if you have care and control. Okay.
Perfect. Thank you.
I've run into situations here in Guelph where, depending on who the city prosecutor of the day is, I find that some of them want things done differently. I had a multi-unit building here in Guelph years ago where there were a number of fire code violations, some in dwelling units, some in common areas, and actually there were some smoke alarm issues. He wanted the property manager, the superintendent, and the corporation that owned the building all brought to court because they all met the definition of owner. So just to give you an idea, that's how our city prosecutor handles it. Common areas, sprinkler system, fire alarm system, that would not be the tenant, right?
I think you're going to probably find in most municipalities that your prosecutors are going to be roughly the same in that regard, where they will say, bring them all in, because if it's that difficult to make that determination, they might want to have them in and say, okay, we're going to identify this in front of a justice, who actually is the owner in this, especially when people are saying, no, it's not my responsibility. And again, this is where your condo stuff comes in, the legal stuff with the condo stuff that you can present. So it's just that you will find that there is quite a bit of sameness that you'll see between municipalities. They will do the same. Not all, but most will say, bring everyone in, not just who you think the owner is, bring in the landlord, bring in the occupant who may be a tenant, you know, property manager may be involved. And that's what we have to do, because if we can't make the determination and the folks aren't bringing it, are bringing it forward to us, then that's the only way it can be deciphered to make a determination as who the owner is. And it could be everybody, actually, depending on the justice.
And Christina,
I found also, if the corporation is paying for those replacement smoke detector CO detectors, that people are much more likely to report it because it's not going to cost them. So that's a tip, certainly, that's helped kind of in between those annual inspections for sure. A question actually probably for you, Mark. Wondering if you can recommend a particularly easier to use fire extinguishers. This person has a fire blanket, but they've been told not to use a fire blanket for their own safety.
In their kitchen? Is this are we referring to a kitchen? Well, let's say these fire blankets that have come out, I've actually bought them. I backed them up. I love them. I think they're fantastic. They're completely fire retardant. You can use them on a quick kitchen fire. There's several different great makes out there. If you want to reach out to me at the end, I can definitely get you in touch with one. Strike First, Kit A. There's a bunch of them that have come out with great manufacturers. I would suggest staying away from your local Canadian Tire. We use an agent in our extinguishers that it's a little bit better quality. Remember, a 5-pound extinguisher is going to put out, it's carrying 5 pounds of extinguishing agent, and that will take the size of one average size barrel of garbage barrel that you would see like in a park. Okay, so that's what you kind of want to have. So if you're having one in your unit, 5-pound ABC would be key. Reach out to me at the end, and I can definitely hook you up with something.
Perfect. Tony, Matt, any reports back from any of the crews that have gone out for, kitchen fires on the use of the fire blankets versus
We haven't had any
extinguishers?
reports to date on those. Nothing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. I think this question kind of goes back to the fire safety plan, but how to ensure residents who need assistance is available. Obviously, making sure that that list is up to date. As soon as you get it, you're updating it. A hot and heavy topic, which probably has a lot of dispute. Wreaths, other decorations, mats, tables, we see people that put, maybe a pumpkin in the hall, or they want to leave all their shoes in the hallway. Certainly during the winter months. I know for Matt, there's some disputing information, but I guess let's talk about best case. What are the best practices around that?
Yeah, here in Guelph, so these types of things like wreaths on doors, historically, we have not actively pursued these. However, if we receive a complaint, we'll have to deal with it in accordance to how the Ontario Fire Code reads. And in the Ontario Fire Code, there is an article that speaks to decorating and interior finish materials. And we would look at that. And it says when you're decorating, any interior finish materials have to meet the flame spread rating set out in the Ontario Building Code. You're not going to find a wreath that demonstrates a flame spread rating on the tag. So we have the authority, we have some discretionary authority to approve something other than that. And if we were to receive a complaint about a wreath on a door and we wanted to apply the Ontario Fire Code, our discretionary approval, there is a standard, a flame resistance standard, CAN ULC S109. If they could prove that that met that, or they purchased a spray that once sprayed or coated in this met that, we would accept it. The other thing we would look at in some buildings, you go through some buildings and there's decorations everywhere. Well, now we're looking at an accumulation of combustible materials potentially in a means of egress to which a fire code speaks to. So if there was an accumulation of combustibles in a means of egress, we would deal with that article in the fire code.
Just remember that a door is not designed, like if you look at a door and look what it's originally designed for, a door is just to put something in it to close, right? It's a closure, right? So having said that, it already comes, and when it's manufactured, whether it has a fire resistance rating, or not, the reality is that's what it's for. Once you start hanging things on it, the door was not designed to hang things on. So that's not what it was designed for. But having said that, if someone's going to put something on there, there is a flame spread rating, and it has to meet that flame spread rating. And Matt is absolutely correct that if there's a wreath or some kind of decorative material on that door, or even on a wall per se, if it meets that same flame spread rating as the wall or as the door, then we're okay with it because it would burn no differently, no worse than what the paint or whatever wallpaper, for example, would be on a wall or a door, whatever the case may be. So That's how we would look at that. Again, too much stuff, or people decorate it, like we'll look at Christmas time, for example, they take a door and they make it look like it's a present and they wrap it up with all kinds of paper and they have, corn husks sticking out of it. So now you're getting that accumulation where you can get yourself quite a bit of smoke infiltration in that means of egress, which is that entire hallway, right? So, and your access to your exits as well. So now we're looking at it differently. These are going to have to be case by case basis. We do have some discretion. We use the fire code and we use any scientific backing to actually make our case if in fact we have to have it removed. We don't do it haphazardly. It's not an abuse of authority. We have to have some kind of referencing behind us, and the Ontario Fire Code gives us that allowance for that.
Perfect, thank you. So I have the last question here is, what are important items to include in a fire safety plan for a condo that's a townhouse site? Is there anything different?
Anything that, like, some of the measures that the fire code sets out are emergency procedures. So the emergency procedures will be based on the type of fire protection equipment available. I mean, if we had a cluster of 5 townhouses, that was considered a building with more than 10 occupants that needed a fire safety plan, and there was no fire alarm system in it, then there would be no, upon hearing fire alarm, do this, this, and this. We might have something, an emergency procedure in there for upon discovery of fire, if safe to do so, bang on the doors in that complex to make people aware once you've evacuated that there is a fire within that building. That's one thing that could be included in there. Otherwise, just the measures in the code, like how to control hazards in your unit, controlling, confining, and extinguishing a fire, emergency procedures, a list of the equipment present, just things like that.
But key, other than supervisor staff who have a responsibility, the key that I could tell to all the occupants, the ones that actually live, whether they're owned, rented, the 2 keyest components that are within a fire safety plan that they should know like the back of their hand is the emergency procedures and how to get out. And secondly, how to control hazards. If they do that, 90 to 99% of any kind of unforeseen fire will not occur, because firstly, if it does, they'll know how to get out like very quickly. And secondly, if they're controlling the hazards, how can a fire actually start, right? Those 2 key points for the occupants. Of course, people like yourself, Christina, and others, you have to know the entirety of that plan and have to know it back and forth. And as Mark has suggested, make sure you make contact with us for certain things, because it becomes a legalized document. Once we hit the approval, it's part of the fire code for that building. So every component of that plan is now a legal document. Any veering from that can cause charges to be laid.
Perfect. Okay. So I do have one other question, which we get a lot, and it wasn't actually in anything. How high can your ladders on your equipment go to save somebody? So this person's in a 19-floor building, but again, we get this question all of the time. If somebody gets trapped in their unit and they're on their balcony, how high does your ladder go?
Our ladder, so when you take into account the distance from the building the truck has to be, then the ladder angling down, we might hit 7 stories.
Okay.
Yep.
Perfect. And then there's obviously other methods. So
just remember one thing here. If you have a fully sprinklered building, okay, if it's fully sprinklered, and usually anything above 6 stories is, if you have a fully sprinklered building and it's operational, the chances of you, if you're an average individual, right, the chances of you being badly injured or dying in a fire are close to 0. Tenability is very high in a sprinklered building. That's why people that may live on a 17th story will, they're going to question, well, fire truck ladder isn't going to get that high to get me off the balcony. You probably, and in most likely, never need it, only because of the sprinklering that's there. Okay.
Perfect. Mark, do you have anything? Mark, do you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, dealing with a lot of high rises, we deal with 80-story buildings now, and it's getting higher and higher by the hour, it seems like. The general consensus is that, unless you're in a, and again, Toronto Fire and Guelph Fire, they all have different views, but dealing with Mississauga and Brampton and Toronto and everything, the general consensus is these designs, these buildings especially now are designed to be able to handle fire. So, you know, unless you're in immediate danger, close your door, make sure it's latched, place a wet towel at the base of the door, and wait for further instruction. Okay, and if you feel you're in deemed in an urgent, urgent situation, then you have to leave the nearest exit and make your way down. But again, in the lower buildings, absolutely, if you can get out, then the best thing for you to do is get out, because the safest place, as they mentioned, is outside. Right. But with
Perfect.
regards to those fire safety plans, each city has a template. So if you are going to tackle it yourself, reach out to them and ask them for their template, and it's going through and answering questions. But again, they're getting so technical now. I really do recommend a professional to jump in and help you with that.
Yeah, and it's definitely not a role that we would do because we wouldn't know enough about it as a property manager, nor would we be able to with our license. I do have one other question. I'm sorry, I know we're trying to keep to time and I'm doing as best, but I also want to make sure some of these questions are answered. When we talked about wreaths and carpets being a certain fire rating, what about furniture in common areas? Is there any requirement of that? Typically, they'll go and the board will buy furniture that they like and they'll have it installed, door decorating committee. Are there any requirements for furniture in lobbies?
Okay, so if you actually have a front lobby that has been built and designed to accommodate furnishings, it's permitted. If, however, the building is not built, and one way of finding this out is you come into a lobby and it's fairly narrow. Well, that wasn't generally designed for you to put couches and sofas and all that kind of stuff in there. Newer buildings, if you go into a lobby, there's a big opening, indents into the wall where people even put in bookcases and other things of that nature. They're perfectly permissible because it's originally designed for that. So if someone wants to do that, it's got to be designed for it. Now, if they're able, also the type that they're able to put there, they either have to be the type that are non-combustible, or in some cases, they might have to have ones that are specifically flammability rated to be put out there. Okay. So it's a case-by-case basis. We have to look at the configuration, but it depends on how it's built. If it was designed for it, it's permissible, but they have to be done in a safe enough fashion, which means they might have to have some kind of a spray application to it so that it doesn't burn easily. So some of the older buildings, unfortunately not, because they're fairly narrow, much older buildings. Some of the newer buildings aren't actually designed to have furnishings and other things there. And they have to be affixed to the area too. We would want them affixed to the floor so they're not easily movable and being tossed or strewn right to a path of exit travel. So that's what we're
Perfect. Excellent. All right, Matt, a best practice, just one that comes to mind right away.
Best practice? Test and maintain your smoke alarms and your carbon monoxide alarms at all times. Don't take them for granted. I'm sure Mark can speak to that as well. You know, they have a shelf life. They get dusty. Batteries are removed. Batteries died. Number one life safety device. Maintain and test your smoke alarms monthly and maintain them in operating condition.
Perfect. Tony?
Ditto to that. And just again, fire safety planning, those two components that I talked to you about, emergency procedures and fire hazard control for the occupants, okay? Know that like the back of your hand, and I guarantee you that you will be much safer for it and know what to do in the event of an unanticipated fire occurrence.
Perfect. Mark, best practice, and not necessarily on fire prevention side. You can do something from contractor side if you'd like.
Educate your board to get away from cheapness. Okay. Boards are still in the mindset of cheap. When it comes to fire protection, listen, if you want to do lawn care and you want to save some money there. When it comes to fire protection, spend a little bit more today to spend less tomorrow. If you find a company that you trust, and we can talk about our services down the road. Christina can give you my contact information. Make sure you find a company that's willing to step up for you. They're willing to show their guys are certified. They're willing to, like, we barcode those devices. So if Mrs. Smith at Suite 302 says we didn't do it, we can show her exact dates and times. Make sure that you educate to them, guys. Going cheap is only going to leave you in a bad situation. Let's spend the right amount of money, spend a fair amount of money to get an excellent service. Okay, that's the way I really want to work through it.
Perfect. And my best practice is hire the professionals to do the professional, whether that's having the lawyer review your documentation to see who actually is responsible for what, reaching out to the fire department. I can't tell, when I had a very large book in Guelph of sites, how many times Matt and I would be talking on a weekend or in the evening as he was walking me through some issue that was happening. So definitely reach out to those professionals in the different fire departments and don't be afraid to ask them for help. They're a great resource. Hand it back to you, Casey and Caitlin. Oh, sorry.
Just one thing, Mark, I need to ask you one question. I want to know how much for Dan Maloney or John Anderson's sweater you have there.
Oh, there's 280 sweaters here and a plane wreck in the other room from Bill.
No, but I'm looking at John
1951,
Anderson and Dan Maloney's. Those are the 1970s and 80s. That's my era. That's the only reason I asked. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
We'll talk offline and we'll invite you guys over. And thank you very much, guys. I really appreciate everything.
Hey, everybody. Thank you so much. That was a great session. So much information. We could talk about this for, hours, obviously, because it is so important. I agree with you, Tony. My 14-year-old son saw the Instagram post of our picture and texted to say, please tell Mark we love his background. So yes, it definitely was very appealing. So thank you very much. Caitlin has the results here for the icebreaker. So I'm going to let her share those. And then we'll be putting up the poll, as I indicated, about how we're going to do these sessions moving forward. But before we get there, I just want to say thank you very much to all of our panelists, Christina, Mark, Tony, and Matt. As I said, lots of information. We will be sharing Mark's information, which he just put into the chat, which we'll share, but we'll also send it out with everything. And if your property is in Guelph, Matt is always so accommodating in taking calls. And in other cities, we do have other people who we speak with as well. So by all means, ask your property manager, who our contact is in the city that you reside in. So thank you again, everyone. Caitlin, let's get that icebreaker done, and then we'll get that poll up.
Awesome. So our question again was, if our panelists were started in a building, what 3 fire safety tools would they choose? So one person said a smoke alarm, an escape ladder, and an extinguisher. That would be Matt. Another person said a portable fire extinguisher, smoke and CO alarms, and a cell phone. That would be Tony. And then one person said a fire extinguisher, a safety plan, and one of the most important things that no one really talks about, but we talked about a lot tonight, was education about fire safety, and that would be Mark. And so those are our answers. Now I'm going to launch a poll, as Casey said, for our future planning. It should pop up on your screen now. What you're going to do is select the answer you prefer and then hit submit. No rush, I will leave it open. This will help us to determine what to do moving forward. So far, unanimous.
We really are just trying to find the best way to deliver education to our boards and to owners and work with our trades and service providers. So absolutely, we really appreciate you taking a couple minutes to answer the poll. And thank you again for joining. Based on what we're seeing here, it looks like we like the current setup. And so our next session is scheduled for May 7th, I believe it is. And we'll take a look at that time. If you have a topic that you would like us to talk about, please feel free to give it to your manager or Kathy or myself or Caitlin. Any of us will take that information. So thanks again for attending, everyone. And it looks like we've had quite a number of votes in so far.
We'll leave it open for 5
We'll
more
leave it
seconds.
open for a couple more minutes here. But again, thanks so much, everyone, for attending. Okay, let's end the poll. And
Awesome.
awesome. Thanks, everybody. Mark, I saw your message. I'll be in touch. And yeah, I think we are all good to leave. Thank you guys for giving us your evening. I know it takes a lot. Much appreciated, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Have a
Night,
good
you.
everybody. Nice meeting you guys.
You too.
Nice to
Take
meet
care.
you too,
Sorry,
Mark.
Mark. We'll stay in touch, okay?
Absolutely.